In the dim light of a late autumn afternoon, a quiet secret lay hidden in the deepest recesses of a long-forgotten family estate. Dust motes danced in the filtered sunlight piercing through narrow attic windows, illuminating relics of the past with a ghostly glow. Amid the clutter of broken furniture and cobweb trunks stood an imposing wooden easel that cradled a mysterious canvas. This old, somber portrait was titled simply, "The Family Portrait." Its frame, intricately carved with swirling vines and faded symbols, spoke of a bygone era when the family's influence was unquestioned. At first glance, the painting had the conventional appearance of a cherished heirloom, a visual recollection of family members posed in a formal tableau. However, as one scrutinized the details, it became painfully apparent that something was not right. In one corner of the portrait, where warmth and laughter should have been captured, an unnerving contradiction took hold. The youngest daughter's presence was marred by a shadow that defied the natural logic of light. It stretched at impossible angles and appeared detached from any identifiable source. As if imbued with a life of its own, her eyes, rendered with masterful yet unnerving detail, seemed to shift when observed from different angles. They bore an intense look, as though silently chronicling the long-buried recollections of untold secrets and sorrows. The painting's overall composition allowed no escapes. Every brushstroke, every nuance of shading resonated with a heavy, clandestine lore that haunted the estate and whispered of a dark family history riddled with disappearance, deception, and an inescapable curse. Slowly, the narrative of the painting began to weave itself into the very fabric of the estate's history. Stories that had long been entombed within whispered conversations and hushed warnings resurfaced with a malevolent intensity. Over the years, family members had attempted to expunge any mention of misfortune, carefully painting over the sins of their ancestors. Yet, as time passed, the hidden truths found desperate ways to reveal themselves, through the silent presence of the portrait and the disturbing phenomena that accompanied it. In this way, the portrait became a silent confessor, a reminder that no matter how resolutely one might try to bury the past, it would unavoidably bleed through the surface of even the most carefully maintained facades. Deep within the estate's labyrinthine corridors and dusty rooms, the process of uncovering this unsettling past began with an innocent curiosity. An ambitious historian, driven by the allure of mystery and the irresistible pull of a legend, embarked on a personal quest to piece together the shattered fragments of the family's secret history. With deliberate steps and measured reverence, the historian pored over faded diaries, brittle letters, and half-remembered oral accounts that recounted fragments of scandal and sorrow. Every document and every whispered account reinforced the disturbing narrative, suggesting that the portrait was far more than a simple family relic. It was a window to an era of betrayal and self-destruction. The historian's investigation revealed that the estate had once been a battleground of conflicting desires and dark ambitions. Over generations, a series of tragedies had befallen the family. Untimely deaths, unexplained disappearances, and inexplicable occurrences had marked the lineage like indelible scars. In particular, the youngest daughter, whose likeness was central to the portrait, had long been a subject of both adoration and silent pity. The peculiar shadow that clung to her figure became emblematic, an eerie metaphor for the hidden burdens and the spectral guilt that seemed to suffuse the entire family line. Her presence in the portrait, caught between innocence and mystery, was a haunting reminder that even beauty and youth could not entirely cast off the pall of ancestral sins. At first, the historian's approach was methodical, almost clinical. Every fact was corroborated and every rumor dissected with rational precision. However, as late nights turned into early mornings spent poring over tattered records by flickering candlelight, the investigation began to warp in unexpected ways. The deeper the historian ventured into the narrative, the more the borders between rational deduction and the inexplicable blurred. In quiet moments, when the mind drifted between certainty and dread, the portrait appeared to take on a life of its own. The eyes of the painted daughter seemed to glimmer with an otherworldly shine that defied both explanation and expectation. An unspoken awareness seemed to radiate from the canvas, as if it were silently warning that some truths were best left undisturbed. Within the stone walls of the attic, the process of restoration provided further clues to the puzzle. An expert in art restoration was called in, one whose reputation for uncovering lost details was matched only by a genuine passion for historical artifacts. The restorer began the painstaking work of removing layers of grime and centuries-old overpainting. With every delicate stroke of the brush, long concealed details, long smoothed over by the passage of time, were revealed. Hidden beneath layers of deliberate concealment were cryptic symbols, barely discernible numbers, and arcane markings that evoked a sense of ritualistic meaning. The restorer's hands trembled as each new detail emerged, as if the very act of revealing these truths disturbed an ancient slumber. The inherited duty of concealment was now irrevocably exposed, laying bare the raw scars of a troubled past. It was as if the brush had awakened specters from beneath the layers, urging the observer to remember a tale that the very walls of the estate had long tried to forget. The historian, now increasingly entangled in the labyrinth of the family's hidden lore, began to document the unfolding drama with an intensity that bordered on the obsessive. Each revelation held the weight of a warning, a delicate balance between the allure of forbidden knowledge and the menace of unleashing forces beyond human control. Every detail of the portrait's transformation, every nuance of the emerging symbols was recorded with careful precision. Page after page filled with fervent scribbles recounted the transition from an apparently benign family relic to a spectral chronicle of disgrace and sorrow. The historian could not shake the feeling of being observed by unseen eyes, as though the very spirit of the portrait was intent on reliving the tragedies it silently witnessed. The sense of being under perpetual scrutiny, that ever-watchful gaze of the youngest daughter's painted eyes, added a personal layer of dread to the investigation. Within the quiet solitude of night, when the estate fell into an almost palpable hush, the mysteries of the portrait began to manifest in strange and unrehearsed ways. Flickering lights in the corridor and soft murmurs echoing in empty rooms trickled into the consciousness of those brave enough to linger near the painting. Shadows took on life of their own, shifting and morphing into uncanny shapes that defied natural cause. The young and the old alike could not help but feel that the portrait was more than an inert object. It was an interactive record of the family's dark soul. The atmosphere of the estate became charged with charged anticipation, as if every particle of dust and every whisper of the wind carried hints of long-forgotten sorrows. The balance between past and present, seen and unseen, hung precariously, and each moment seemed laden with the possibility that more than just memories might be stirring within the walls. As the layers of history were exposed, so too were the threads of the family's cursed lineage. In hushed recollections passed down from one generation to the next, an unspoken truth had taken root. The portrait was not merely a testament to the family's golden days but rather a permanent marker of its irreversible descent into chaos. The youngest daughter's enigmatic gaze, with its shadow that defied normality, became a symbol of all that was hidden, the secrets too dangerous to speak aloud even under the soft and forgiving light of day. Her presence in the portrait was a silent indictment, a spectral record of choices made in desperation and the inevitable punishment that followed. It was as though the canvas served as both a witness and a repository of deep-seated guilt, silently bearing the burden of innumerable past transgressions that had seeped into every fiber of the family's being. Walking slowly through the corridors of memory and reality, the historian pieced together accounts of whispered family lore and enigmatic symbols that echoed with the precision of a dirge. The estate itself seemed to breathe with an ancient rhythm, each creak of the floorboard resonating with echoes of sorrow and despair. Through meticulous research, it became apparent that the family had endeavored to paint over their sins not merely in the literal sense, but through a crafted narrative that was as delicately artificial as the layers of paint on the portrait. Despite their best efforts, every effort to conceal the dark inner workings of their lineage only deepened the mystery. With each layer removed, the historian found not clarity but a more complex and troubling mosaic of secrets, a puzzle that refused any easy resolution and left more questions than answers. A palpable tension settled over the estate as more fragments of the truth came to light. The artwork, now regarded as a cursed relic, stood at the very center of an unfolding drama. Ethereal motifs and spectral details, previously invisible to the naked eye, were now discernible to those who had dared to peer beneath the surface. Every notch and every faint mark on the canvas spoke of a ritualistic attempt at self-redemption, a desperate bid to exorcise the hauntings of a past marred by betrayal and regret. In the interplay of light and shadow, the portrait became an acoustic memory, its silent volumes echoing the cries of the forsaken and the condemned. An overwhelming sense of inevitability pervaded the estate, as though the truth, no matter how artfully obscured, was destined to emerge in its raw, unvarnished form. Within this charged atmosphere of inevitable revelation, the historian encountered intricacies of human emotion intertwined with the supernatural. Each carefully curated detail of the portrait was a narrative in itself, a fragmented record of moments when passion, jealousy, and despair converged. The canvas, with its chipped edges and faded colors, gradually transformed from a relic of an idealized past into a splintered mirror reflecting a legacy of deceit. The historian's notes, filled with observations of subtle shifts in hue and tone, revealed that the portrait was both a product and a victim of its own myth. In this way, every element of the painting, the elusive shadow behind the youngest daughter and the shifting quality of her gaze, became emblematic of the inescapable fact that every family has its darkest chapters, waiting silently to be unearthed. In the waning hours of an overcast evening, as twilight bled into the deep blues of approaching night, the estate itself became a stage for the final act of this unfolding tragedy. The mansion's corridors, long silent and abandoned by joy, now resonated with the weight of an impending reckoning. The historian, steadfast in dedication but visibly shaken by the undeniable aura of the supernatural, could almost sense that even the ancient walls bore witness to the punitive legacy of concealed sins. Every gust of wind, every creak in the wooden floors, contributed to a relentless climax. A moment when the boundaries between past transgressions and present fears blurred into a single, overwhelming experience of despair and inevitability. In that charged moment, as the historian carefully closed a leather-bound journal filled with spectral observations, the portrait seemed to command the entire space with a final, unyielding intensity. The youngest daughter's ever-watchful eyes were nearly tangible, her secretive shadow unfurling in silent protest against a life driven by lies and half-remembered promises. There, upon that ancient canvas, the full measure of a cursed bloodline was encapsulated in a single, haunting image, a warning to those who would dare to forget that the recesses of history are filled with manifolds of sorrow, deception, and regret. Every element of the family portrait now held meaning, the subtle interplay of light and dark, the inscrutable expressions of its subjects, and the delicate yet insistent details that only emerged when one took the time to look deeply enough. This was not a painting meant merely to capture a moment of familial pride. It was an enduring narrative of a family's desperate and ultimately doomed attempt to rewrite its destiny. Each brushstroke and each hidden symbol in the portrait evoked memories of long-lost secrets and unspoken tragedies, an ever-present reminder that the pursuit of redemption often comes at an immeasurable cost. As the final shadows of the day dissolved into night, the undeniable power of the portrait lingered like an elegy for the lost. The family estate, with its history of both illustrious beginnings and grim denouement, stood as a testament to the idea that every act of concealment has its price. In that silent, oppressive space, where the past refused to remain a distant memory, the portrait compelled its viewers to confront the intermingled nature of beauty and darkness. A meeting point where art, truth, and human frailty coalesced into a single, unforgettable moment. And so, with the fading echo of a family's lament, the portrait demanded one final, unanswerable question. In looking upon it, what does one truly see in the background of a legacy that has been carefully, yet futilely, hidden away? Every meticulous observation, every tremulous brushstroke that recounted a legacy of love and despair, converged in this emblematic piece, the family portrait. As the historian's gaze lingered on the ominous details, an overwhelming realization set in. The portrait was not simply an artifact of the past, but a mirror to the present. It illuminated the fragile boundaries between the known and the unspoken, challenging those who dared to peer into its depths to acknowledge that beneath every picture, every cherished memory, there might lie a story too painful to forget. And thus, in that somber interplay of light, shadow, and whispered memories, the truth of the family's legacy was laid bare, a truth that, like a specter in the night, would haunt the halls of the estate so long as its ancestral blood continued to flow, a perpetual echo shadowed by regret and mystery. In its final, unassailable form, the portrait encapsulated the essence of an irreversible fate, a visual testament to the inexorable pull of secrets and the haunting persistence of forgotten sins. Even as the historian prepared to leave the collective memories behind, a faint pulse of the past reverberated in the silent watch of the painted eyes. In that quiet, reflective space, Every viewer was left to wonder if the spectral warning within the portrait was an invitation or a dire admonition. The depths of the family's history, exposed in painstaking detail and layered with unequivocal sorrow, whispered from each faded corner, urging all who beheld its enigmatic visage to acknowledge that some stories are so indelibly etched in shadow that they refuse to fade with the passing of time. And so, as the heavy night descended upon the estate, the narrative of the family portrait remained suspended between the realms of memory and myth. The image of the youngest daughter, marked by a disconcerting and unexplained shadow, stood as a poignant reminder that even in the very act of remembering, there lies a risk of unbinding the darkest parts of one's history. In the silence that followed, the estate and its inhabitants, whether living or in memory, were left to wrestle with a timeless, unsettling question. In every picture that tells a story, might there not also be a hidden truth that refuses to be silenced? With a final, lingering impression of haunting beauty and melancholic mystery, the portrait watched over an estate steeped in secrets, a sentinel of a lineage burdened by regret and an unyielding reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, will always find a way to bleed through the canvas of time.